hello there. That was so terrible. What? Hello there. That was so bad. One thing before we start, although I am sure there are at least 5 more English-speaking reviews, at least, out there on the internet for Money Heist Part 3 already, I'd be careful of anyone who's claiming to have reviewed it and have put any real thought into it more than about a day earlier than this, because I just don't see how you would have time to watch it and think about it seriously and then write a review and film it and edit it and all that sort of stuff much earlier than this. I saw this a lot with the Netflix original Triple Frontier, people reviewing it, 3 hours after it had premiered, basically, and saying that, yeah, it was good, and then just the odd criticism. It's like, you could have said that about any movie. I just want to let you know that I watched Money Heist Part 3 over 3 nights, and in preparing for this review, I watched almost all of it again in fast forward just so I would remember what happened at all points of the series. So what you're about to hear is the truth, and that is to say, my completely subjective opinion. Vamos! To summarize my thoughts on the first 2 parts of Money Heist or La Casa de Papel, Part 1 was amazing, one of the most exciting series I'd seen in a very long time. A couple of things didn't quite line up, but that was being nitpicky, and there was a bit of oversaturation from a style point of view as far as I was concerned, but overall it was excellent. Part 2 lost its way significantly. Although it looked to the naked eye to be a continuation of the quality of Part 1, all the subtlety of character, intelligent plotting, clever subversion of our expectations, thrilling games of cat and mouse, that was all gone in Part 2 as far as I was concerned. It was still watchable, but it wasn't half the series that Part 1 was. Part 3, I'm happy to report, claws its way back a fair way. It's definitely an improvement over Part 2, and it felt much closer to achieving what I imagined to be the original vision, which is surprising because I don't believe it was ever intended to exist. But once Netflix got involved, of course there was going to be a Part 3. Let's be honest, we're probably far from done even now, because Netflix would get more seasons out of... I don't know, this metaphor doesn't work. They would get more seasons out of something that doesn't warrant more seasons, is the point. But I have to say that if the problem with a lot of series is that they have not enough ideas and they're stretched far too thin, the problem with Money Heist Part 3 is actually the opposite. There were actually too many good ideas. How? I mean, how can there possibly be too many good ideas in a series? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I have an answer for you. There were about 15 to 20 good ideas in this entire series, about 10 of which probably could have warranted a whole episode of more in-depth exploration. That's not to say being stretched out. I hate stuff being stretched out, and that was a huge problem in Part 2. Part 2 was full of boring ideas that just went on for 15 minutes when they should have been eliminated entirely, not even included. But Part 3 had quite a few good ideas that didn't need to be stretched out, rather fleshed out and explored, not just stretched out, right? But there are so many that even if you dedicated the entire series just to good ideas, which is not actually what happened, I'll get to that in a sec, you'd end up with enough time for each one, sure, but even then, they're not all compatible good ideas. There are a few ideas that basically contradict each other. So they would have made an excellent premise for an entire episode of a different show, but they don't quite work in this show. And then you have the problem that almost a third of this series is wasted on bad ideas. Guys, it just occurred to me that even when not looking at my notes, I'm looking at the camera, but I'm not looking into the lens, so I will try and do that from now on. Anyway, we were talking about bad ideas. I won't mention all of them, but one of those bad ideas has a name, and it is Tokyo. Tokyo is a rubbish character. I'm sorry if you like her. She wasn't amazing in the first 2 parts, but now she's gone from being just okay to being an actual black mark on the series. She has no redeeming features, and I'm not talking about character flaws like a deliberate piece of writing that make her compelling to watch. I'm talking about things that actually basically make her a villain here. I actually hate her. She makes stupid decisions for stupid reasons. She blames everyone else when those decisions have consequences. She flips on decisions at the whim of what the writers want for the episode, and to boot, she has the most annoying haircut in the world. And this isn't an attractiveness thing, okay? I'm not commenting on her attractiveness. I'm saying that that haircut makes her less likable than she would otherwise be, and that is saying something. And for those who are going to say that her character being dislikable is deliberate, incorrect. -1 point to you. You don't create drama by making one of your lead characters 100% dislikable. You create drama by making them likable and then having them make decisions that are not the best for them or for those around them, a la Dr. House. We want to be rooting for them, but then saying, no, why are you doing that? With Tokyo, if there's a reason that she's doing anything, it's because she's selfish and dumb, and that is a bad combination for a character. Thankfully, for a lot of the series, we're able to forget that the whole reason any of this is happening is Tokyo's idiotic whims, because if we were conscious of that the whole time, then the whole series would be almost as unwatchable as her stupid haircut, but for much of it, we're able to forget it and instead enjoy the company of the Professor and Raquel, who are easily the best characters and the most compelling actors to watch. Also, I kept my mouth shut about this for my reviews of parts 1 and 2, but the Professor looks ridiculously like my cousin. It's just weird. I'm sorry I don't have a photo of my cousin, but I don't need one. He looks like that. Who cares, man? Another of the bad ideas is the very inconsequential but persistent theme of the patriarchy versus the women. It crops up at random intervals and contributes nothing to what's actually happening, and there's a particularly long and pointless scene of essentially monologue from Palermo, who's one of the new characters who didn't really bring anything to the story. And the scene is just filler, if ever I've seen it. I even re-watched it after having seen the whole series, and okay, I can see what they were attempting, but in my opinion, it's a swing and a miss. They focused on the wrong thing. It needed a sentence, not a scene. Another new character, Bogota, is somehow much more interesting. I'm not even sure what it is, but there's not nearly enough of his character. He should have had better exploration for sure. This is what I mean by too many good ideas. At least 20% of the series is wasted on bad ideas, but even if those were removed, there's still just too much stuff going on. It seems that the creators behind this series do not like making difficult choices. They have an idea, they write it down, it makes it into the script, it makes it into filming, and then it makes it into the final cut, when really it should have been cut at some point in the process. In fact, there was one scene where they flash back to before the first series, and that's when, so we're talking about when the whole gang is in that old house, and it's so unrelated to anything that I genuinely wonder if they had filmed it already for part 1, and they were just too fond of how it looked, because it does look nice, and so they couldn't ever completely say goodbye to it, and they use it to try to build a connection to part 1, but it just makes no sense for it to turn up now. If you like to classify things in terms of episodes, the big problems here are in the middle, so episodes 4, 5 and 6 particularly. There was definitely some serious padding done there, which is silly because, as I've mentioned, there's easily 7 hours of good material here, 3 hours of which was not even in the series. All of this sounds like I'm being critical of it, but if you just sit back, you don't think about it too much, you just let it wash over you and try to ignore Tokyo and her dumb haircut, this series works. It's thrilling, it's exciting enough in most parts. Episodes 2 and 3 in particular felt almost as if we'd returned to the glory days of part 1. The last 2 episodes as well, very nicely executed. It's thrilling, but the struggle of upper hand between the cops and the robbers is a little bit too fickle. If you remember part 1, it felt like one team would control the game for quite a while, and then the other team would make a move that would flip that, and they would control the game for a whole new episode. In part 3, the cat and mouse is a little bit too fast. The power shifts so quickly that it never builds any tension, because we know we're not far away from yet another shift in power, and so it doesn't really mean anything when it's like, oh, now this team has the upper hand. You're like, yeah, but 20 minutes ago they had the upper hand. Having said that, some of the new characters on the police's side are pretty decent. I enjoyed them. The heavily pregnant negotiator, she sort of seemed a bit ham-handed at first, but I grew to enjoy her character, especially towards the end. I normally can't buy people as ruthless as she is, especially women, but the actress really sells it to me, and I like the new Colonel as well. However, if we're talking about characters, and I'm trying not to harp on about negative things here, Angel, or Angel, Raquel's mate from part 1, he doesn't really make sense to me. His motivations don't seem to line up with part 2. They may have something in store for him, but for the time being, it seems like they've actually forgotten how part 2 ended. It's important to remember that a series can get away with a lot if it's exciting and convincing, and mostly part 3 does get away with a lot of stuff. But even so, there are some serious realism issues here, and that the excitement is just not enough to cover them. For example, the entire premise of a hostage situation, be it real or fictitious, is that if the police move in, hostages die. That is what a hostage is. Subscribe or I kill the panda. No, subscribe. It's really not that complicated, but there are multiple times in part 3 that neither the police nor the robbers seem to actually understand the concept of a hostage. Additionally, the police know by now that the robbers won't actually hurt any hostages because they're sort of vigilante heroes and not inherently violent people. And then there are several moments with characters standing around pointing guns at each other, and in complete contrast to most movies, there is not nearly enough gunfire, because we're talking about scenarios where someone would definitely have been killed. Now, I am not a stickler for realism. I've said that in a number of my reviews, but this isn't a small detail of realism. This is an entire premise issue. It's a hostage situation. If the bad guys won't hurt the hostages and the police still won't hurt the bad guys, that's not a hostage situation, that's a party. To summarize my thoughts on part 3, happily, it's a mildly firm recommendation from me. There's plenty to like here. It's very similar to the first season, maybe even a bit too similar, but there are a few new dynamics, so there's a reasonable amount more thrills than there are downers and inconsistency. But if I'd give this, say, a 7 out of 10, then in order to be a 9 out of 10 like part 1 was, it would need to shed a bunch of dead weight and spend some more time on a premise and a tense situation that actually makes sense. And Tokyo needs an entire reworking because she's supposed to be one of our main heroes and she's just so dislikable. I was genuinely hoping that she'd catch a bullet. Ultimately, there is definitely enough here for me to want in for a part 4, and although I would call the end of part 3 a little bit of a season bait, it at least retained some of its dignity and didn't just throw the last 3 or 4 parts to the dogs like a piece of meat, which Netflix is wont to do lately. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I don't actually hurt pandas in my spare time, or in any of my time actually. In my spare time, I do this. I film reviews for foreign language TV shows. I'm filming another Netflix European series today, so as you can see, it's a very small channel. It really helps me out when you subscribe. I see every single one of them and it helps motivate me to keep going, so I really appreciate it when you subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, wherever you are, whatever language you call your own. I'll see you in a few days for the next one. See you later.